When I was 17 years old and I was about to embark on that next journey in my life, I had worked really, really hard throughout my high school years to position myself to go to the schools that I was interested in Boston and California. I was raised in Miami, Florida, so California was very exciting at that point. And one day, my father came home and shared the devastating blow. He had shared with me that he was going to have to file for bankruptcy, and there was no money for me to go to college. And so the decision had been made, without me being a part of that decision, that I was going to go to my state school where my brother went to school, because that was going to be the way we could make things financially feasible. And I knew from the moment that I stepped foot on that campus, it was not the right place for me. I didn't feel inspired. I wasn't excited. I knew that I was a fish out of water, but I was going to have to figure out the way to make the best of it. So what I decided to do was to push through school as quickly as I could, and so I ended up graduating in 3 years. And just prior to my graduation, I sat down with the chairman of the communications department, a man by the name of Dr. Donald Underwright. And he asked me, he said, "What are your plans?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go to law school from here." And he said, "Why are you going to go to law school?" And I said to him, "Because I think that's what I want to do, is practice law." And he said, "Rather than think about something, why not know what you want to do? Why don't you get out in the world and do a final year abroad somewhere?" And I said, "Well, that sounds interesting." So I went home that night and I called my parents and I said, "Mom, I'd like to do a semester in London." And she said, "No, that's just not possible." I knew financially it would be a big stretch for my family at that point, even though I had worked most through my undergrad and ended up paying for my undergrad. And I went back to Dr. Underwright's office the next morning and I said, "I'm sorry, it's a great idea. Thank you for taking the time, but it's just not possible." And he said to me, "What is your parents' phone number?" So I gave him the phone number and I left. That night, I got a call from my mother, and she said, "I guess we're going to have to buy you a coat." And I said, "For what?" "Because it's cold in London, and you'll need a coat." So with excitement, I marched right back into Dr. Underwright's office the next day, and I said, "What happened? How did you convince them?" And he said to me, "Deborah, I see something in you that I rarely see in students your age. And you've got to get out into the world. And you've got to explore it. You've got to understand how different people live in different situations. And most importantly, you've got to figure out to begin to understand how the world works." So off to London I went, and my whole world opened up. I realized there was artistic expression in people. And growing up in Miami, Florida, I had no idea that there were homeless people and there were wars going on. I lived a very sheltered life. And I realized that within myself, I had become an advocate. I cared about issues. I cared about people. I was interested in civil liberties and human rights. And so after that semester in London, I came back home and I started law school with my plan. That was my plan, to finish up law school. And upon finishing that first semester, I looked at my mother and I said, "I can't stay." And she said, I know you can't." So I had decided, after having that experience in London and having a mini internship in Parliament, that I wanted to be in Washington. I needed to be in the center of things. I didn't know anybody living in Washington, D.C., but I was just going to pick myself up and I was going to go. I wanted to work on Capitol Hill. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know if it meant you get coffee for the member of Congress, but I just knew that I needed to be there. And this time, I had the tools to do something about it. So I packed up my car, drove 4 hours to the train station, put my car on the auto train, slept there overnight on the train, landed in Quantico, Virginia, and ended up staying on the couch of a friend of a friend of a friend type of thing. It was the most uncomfortable experience. But I knew that in order to achieve what I wanted, it wasn't going to be easy. In fact, it was going to be this path of most resistance. But within 2 weeks, I had landed a job as a waitress because I had to pay the bills. I had found myself a place to live. And every day that I had off, I knocked on doors. Every day, I went up to Capitol Hill and I said, do you have an opportunity? Are there any jobs available? And day after day after day, I got the door slammed in my face. Nope, we don't have anything here. Nope, no opportunities. Check back with us in a couple months. So September went by, October went by, November went by, and I called my father crying, saying, when is it going to happen? I took this chance to be here and it's not working out. And he said to me, it will. You are a risk taker. It's something we've always known about you. You've got to follow who you are. It will happen, but it may not happen on the timeline that you want it to happen. So 1 month after that conversation, I landed a job with the incoming senator from Florida, U.S. Senator Connie Mack, and my whole world started to change. Literally one day, I was waitressing, and 5 days later, I was then sitting in the 5th row of the inauguration of President George Bush. It was literally almost like an overnight experience. I was starting to get on this path that I wanted to be on. Still, it wasn't easy. I felt lonely. I felt unsure of this new direction I had taken. So when I finally mustered up the energy and enough cash, I bought myself a bike, a red Trek. And every Saturday, I would ride my bike to this place, Roosevelt Island, which is technically still in Virginia, but part of Washington, D.C. And you'd have to cross this bridge over the Potomac River to get to Roosevelt Island. And you'd hike in a bit, and you'd get to the statue. And I would read this quote that then became my guiding mantra every Saturday. It's hard to fail, but it's worse never having tried to succeed. And that would just remind me of this decision I made to go to Washington. So I worked in the US Senate. From there, I went over to the US House of Representatives and worked there. Then I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Then I got a job at the White House in the first President Bush administration. And from there, it was just a continuum in my career where I just took risk after risk after risk. I was on air with CNN for a long time. I wrote my first book still in Washington. And then one day, my husband came home and he said, after being in 18 years of Washington, D.C., he said, we're moving to California. We're moving to this place called Silicon Valley. I had never been here before. I'd been to San Francisco, I'd been to Los Angeles, but never to Silicon Valley. And again, I needed to reinvent and take the biggest risk of my life to go from this career that I'd had in national politics and media and transcended into the world of Google and Intel. But I knew that I was a risk taker. I knew I had the tools. And so I just decided if I was going to be here, I was going to learn what entrepreneurship was about, and I was going to build out companies, which is what I did. I became so fascinated by risk-taking that I wrote a book about it. It's the book that's in your bag that you get to take home. And I'm often asked, where does risk lie? How should I think about risk and taking risk in my life? And I like to think about it as a majestic tree growing. And the trunk of the tree is the foundation of who you are. The branches that extend from that trunk are who people expect you to be. It's the direction that maybe your parents, your teachers, your peers, they put you on this path. But then those secondary branches are places that you start to travel on your own. The leaves on the trees are the people in your life. Sometimes they're there for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. They stay and they go. And then that root system below is your ecosystem. It's that entire ecosystem of what makes you you. But risk lies in that open space, in the open spaces between the branches, in the open space above the tree. And that's for you to decide what type of risk in life you want to take. Risk has been a really dirty word, and in the business world, it gets held hostage by the corporate finance world. But really, risk-taking in all of us enables us to grow. Risk is the difference between living an ordinary life and an extraordinary life. If you don't take risk, you remain completely idle. So I'm often asked, what are those characteristics of great risk takers? They refuse to accept the status quo. They know that something can be done just slightly different, slightly better. And that's who many of our great innovators that we know today took an idea and they improved upon it. They just saw it a little bit differently. They are very much in touch with a much greater purpose in life. It's the advocate inside of you. It's where your passion lies. What do you care about? What makes you tick? They are creators and not observers. They are the people who are doing things that everybody else stands on the sideline and watches. You want to be a great creator. You are so blessed to grow up in this area in Silicon Valley, and if you attend Harker or the schools surrounding the area, you are that much more ahead of the game because you are exposed to this great collaborative ecosystem that we all live in. But it's up to you to create rather than observe others creating. And lastly, risk takers believe that anything is possible, just like Dr. Donald Ungerleider. This is a man who I barely knew, who offered financial assistance to my parents for me to be able to go to London. An incredible gift, because while my career path was made up of very serendipitous moments, I do believe, had it not been for Dr. Donald Ungerleider, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you right now, because he gave me that inspiration. He said yes. Conversations of yes and. You want to be that person when your friends ask you, can you help me with X? You say yes, and what else can I do? You want to surround yourself by people who say yes and. This is what I teach in the business world now. Creating cultures of yes, because you can get miraculous things done when people believe in you. They may know that your idea is not perfect, but they know that you have the will and the risk-taking ability to figure out what that right fit is. So make sure that eventually you're surrounded by people who tell you yes and. Not no, not yes but, because then you're around people who believe in you. And that's a really important part of taking risk, is not having people throw barriers up or any challenges. So I want to leave you with a really great quote. A ship is always safe at the shore, but that's not what it's built for. And I thank you very much for your time.